Welcome to the Abridged Presidential Histories with Kenny Ryan, episode 44A, Inside the Obama Campaign with Chelsea Waliser. I'm excited to welcome Chelsea Waliser to the show today. Chelsea was a regional field director during the lead-up to the first in the nation Iowa Caucus during Barack Obama's Dark Horse 2008 campaign, and she was the Washington State Director during his 2012 re-election campaign. We have talked to many observers of history on this podcast, and I'm excited to talk to someone who lived history today. So today we're going to discuss what it was like on the inside of Obama's 2008 presidential campaign. Thank you for joining me, Chelsea.
Thank you, Kenny. I am excited to get in the time machine and go back. I don't even know how many years, almost 20, to talk about Obama '08.
Isn't that crazy to think? Almost 20. My
It
goodness.
is.
So you were an Iowa regional field director during the lead up to the 2008 Iowa caucus. I guess my first question is, when did you join the campaign? And also, what does that role do? What are your responsibilities as regional field director?
Yeah. Yeah. So I joined the campaign in the spring of 2007.
Mhm.
So quite a ways before the January 2008 Iowa caucus. And my job was on our organizing team. So one of the largest staffs in any political campaign, but especially in the Iowa caucus, are the field organizers. So the people who are going out, talking to potential caucus goers, recruiting volunteers, planning events with then Senator Obama and Mrs. Obama,
Hmm.
and really being like the feet on the ground, the boots on the ground of the campaign in all of Iowa's 99 counties. And so my job was I was lucky enough to be in the big booming metropolis of Des Moines, and I led a team of about a dozen field organizers who were, people who were responsible for a neighborhood within Des Moines for recruiting all of our
Mhm.
precinct captains and volunteers, and really kind of managing the voter contact, the get out the vote, getting people to commit to caucus, and planning events in their neighborhood.
So, how did you get, a role like that? How does somebody get a role like that in a campaign?
I mean, how does anybody get any job in our economy, right? Um, a little bit of applying for jobs and a whole lot of, connections.
Mhm.
Most people who end up in that field organizer job, it's their first job out of college, or it's their first job in politics, whatever it is that they're coming from. So I had worked as a field organizer, actually. Oof, man, I'm really dating myself. Even long ago, more than that, in 2004, for
Mhm.
our US Senator here in Washington State, Patty Murray. So I had worked on a couple campaigns, and knew some folks who had worked in Iowa before. And I was, aspiring to kind of move up in politics, and had just always heard that the Iowa caucus was like the Super Bowl of working in
Yeah.
campaigns, or that's how it was described to me. And so I had kind of, and the timing was right for me because I had been a field organizer in 2004, and then I moved into being a regional field director in 2006. And so that was a really like logical next step in my career. And I knew some wonderful mentors who, happened to be a bit more kind of connected
Mm.
on the national political scene, who were going to Iowa, who helped me to get a job there.
Yeah, I have to think, with all due respect to the state fair and Iowa football, the caucus is probably the biggest event like in Iowa that happens.
It is a pretty big deal. Yeah.
So there were quite a few Democrats running in 2008. The favorite was Hillary Clinton. What drew you to young Illinois Senator Barack Obama?
Well, Obama just was so different from the very beginning. In your first podcast about the Obama presidency,
Yeah.
you talked about his speech at the Democratic National Convention in 2004. And like a lot of people, I heard something very different from him
Mm.
in 2004 than I was hearing from a lot of other politicians. Even from my perspective, working in campaigns and being up close, what I was watching on TV with everyone else during the DNC was something that seemed and felt really different to me as well. And then in 2006, I was working on another congressional campaign here in Washington State. And, that DNC speech in 2004 really made Obama a big celebrity in politics.
Yeah.
Everybody wanted him to come and campaign for them. including some of our candidates here in Washington State. And
Mm.
so I will never forget, in 2006, he came to Washington State to raise money for some of our candidates. And I was working for one of those candidates at the time. And people were lining up hours in advance of
Mm.
him speaking at a high school gym around the block, on a Saturday morning. And I was there because my candidate was speaking at this event. And I had
Right.
never seen anything like that before. In the last two cycles that I had worked in campaigns, it was like squeezing blood out of rocks to get people to show up to see your
Yeah.
candidate.
Yeah.
You'd be out there trying to haul people in from the sidewalk, just so you didn't have an empty room to listen to your like US senator
Yeah.
speak.
Yeah.
And here we were, we had this other US senator coming, and people were lining up around the block. And I just remember thinking, I mean, I remember the moment as clear as day. I was like standing outside holding a placard or something, at this like outside this high school gym and thinking like, wow, like this person is really something special and
Mm.
really something different. And what I heard from him 2 years ago at the DNC really has like clearly resonated with everybody. And I just knew that I wanted to be a part of that, and I wanted to see what's it like to work on a campaign where you have a ton of energy and passion and
Mm.
momentum. Um, so that was what made me really excited about him.
That's awesome. And we're going to talk more about what that was like in the campaign. But before we do, I want to do a little stage setting on Iowa in particular. They do not hold a primary, which is straightforward. You go and you vote. They hold a caucus. So, real quick, how do caucuses work?
Oh my gosh. I hope there's a real quick answer to how caucuses work. It's so complicated. So I probably some of your listeners are familiar with ranked choice voting.
Hmm.
It's kind of like ranked choice voting, but live in person with your body is the only way I can describe it. And it's almost like the people who invented caucuses were trying to make it a test to figure out how hard can we possibly make it for people to participate in democracy. Let's do all those things, and that's what a caucus is. No, that's like the cynical view. I think the wonderful thing about a caucus is that it's a community meeting. So people gather together in the type of place that you would typically go to vote on a paper ballot,
Okay.
and you um, basically go to the corner of the room that is set up for your candidate,
Hmm.
and then they take attendance. They do a roll call and they count how many people have showed up to support a given candidate.
Great.
And that's essentially how you vote. But the ranked choice part of it is that if your candidate doesn't get a certain threshold of people supporting them, then
Ah.
everybody in your group gets to go to another corner. They get to
Ah.
go pick a second choice candidate and
Got it.
move across to the other side of the high school gymnasium and band together with that candidate.
Yeah.
Um, and it all takes place on the same night at the
Hmm.
same time across, Iowa had something like 1,000 precincts and 99 counties. So at the same time, on January 3rd, 2008, everybody had to show up at the same time. You couldn't be late,
Hmm.
didn't matter.
Mm.
If you didn't
Hmm.
get there on time, you didn't get counted.
Mm.
And so it's a massive organizing effort for the campaigns to make sure people all show up on the
There.
right day
Yeah.
at the right time. They've got childcare. Kenny, you and I now
Wow.
both have young kids.
Yes.
And can you imagine going to a 3-hour public meeting at 7 p.m. on a
No.
weeknight with your baby, right? No, I mean,
Yeah.
and I have a 4-year-old. How are people like us supposed to caucus?
Yeah.
But there's something that's, kind of beautiful and messy about it. And I feel lucky that I got to be part of it when it was still beautiful. And I'm sure in 2020 it all fell apart because it was too messy, and we'll probably never have a meaningful Iowa caucus again.
That's true. Spoilers for the future. Um,
Exactly.
so Iowa, it's not only a caucus, this weird, interesting, confusing thing. It is also the first state on the electoral calendar, the first to vote or a caucus on who the Democratic nominee should be. So I'm curious, how important to Obama's campaign was it that he went in Iowa? Was this something that y'all were really talking about? The importance of this is first.
Yep. So Obama certainly came out of that 2004 DNC speech,
Yeah.
getting a lot of attention, being something of a political celebrity. But he was only a US senator who had been in office for 2 years. He
Right.
didn't have a big operation. He did have some name recognition with people in politics or people who, were part of the Democratic Party, but not really the country at large. And so making a big impact coming out of Iowa, being able to do really well there and build momentum was really the cornerstone of the entire strategy early. It was do really well in Iowa, try to win Iowa, and then have that kind of cascade and take him on through the remaining of the primaries. And let's not forget, there were so many incredible candidates in
Yes.
2008 who were running on the Democratic side. It obviously came down to Obama and Hillary, but John Edwards was a really strong candidate in Iowa.
Hmm.
Even, Bill Richardson,
Oh
Dennis
yeah.
Kucinich, bless his heart, had a huge following in Iowa. There were just a ton of really great candidates, actually. So he really needed to do something to make a big impact early.
Well, I'm trying to remember, was that the year that even like at the debate stage, did they have almost two debates because there were so many candidates who,
Yeah,
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 yeah.
it was a huge crowd that year. Okay, so it's a huge crowd. Obama's in it, but he's special in the sense that he's the guy who's running to be the first black president in American history. And Iowa, in case anyone hasn't been to Iowa, is very, very white. So I'm
Hmm.
curious, what did you think the odds of success were when you first joined the campaign? We know the state's important, but I mean, you look at that right there, and that's something that jumps out.
Hmm. I'll be honest with you, Kenny. I mean, I was 25 when I did
Yeah,
this, and I
yeah.
was so naively optimistic about everything in America. I had read Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States, and I
Mm,
thought I knew everything about everything America had overcome, and was just so inspired by how much he was inspiring other people that
mm,
I would say looking back now, I didn't really appreciate what a big hill he had to climb.
yeah.
And so maybe in retrospect, it's even more incredible that he
Mm,
was able to do that. I mean, I think a lot has been written about, and you certainly alluded to this in your first podcast about just his own background and his own identity and like
yeah, yeah.
really being able to relate to people in Iowa. Because frankly, it was his grandparents. That's who
Yeah,
caucus goers
yeah.
were, right? Just, really lovely old white people is who really dominated that electorate. And that was a group of people that, Barack Obama felt really comfortable with. Um, but I was amazed by how open-minded people were, how supportive people were of him in the state. Not just in Des Moines, which is a big city and much more diverse than the rest of the state, but hearing
Mhm.
from my colleagues across the state about, the farming communities that they were organizing who were just really responding so positively to him having a different message and a different approach.
So what was the strategy? What was that different approach? What was Team Obama going to do different from everyone else to win in Iowa?
A few things. So to this day, I think that is still one of the best run organizations I've ever worked for
Mm,
as an employee with the most incredible leadership that I've had the opportunity to work under. And there were really three things that we were doing that were the primary drivers of our strategy. So first was expanding the electorate.
mhm,
So if you looked at kind of who had caucused before in Iowa, it's a
mhm.
pretty small slice of people. So it's probably only 15 or 20% of all Democrats even went to a caucus.
Yeah.
And our campaign knew that if we were just going to be talking to people who caucused before, we couldn't win because those
Mm,
were the people who were probably going to support Hillary. We're probably going to support John
mhm.
Edwards. We're not going to support this young two-term black US senator who had opposed the Iraq war, had a funny sounding name, all of the
Right.
things.
Right.
So we knew that we had to expand the electorate. And for us, that meant first time caucus goers, so registered Democrats who'd never been to a caucus. That meant disillusioned Republicans, people who were
Mm,
unhappy with George W. Bush and wanted to vote for change and were looking for a new political home. It meant a lot of young voters. So we had a really aggressive college campus strategy at all of the colleges in Iowa to turn out young voters.
mhm.
So that really like expanding the electorate, bringing new people in was the foundation of the strategy, and it ended up working. So
Yeah.
I, you know, caucuses previous to 2008 turnout was about 100,000 people. And in 2008, it was 200,000 people. So
Wow.
it was doubled. And that wasn't just Obama, of course. That was having the first
Sure.
woman running for
Yeah.
president, right? It was having this incredible slate of candidates. But I am certain that our really aggressive organizing approach had a big part to do with that. And so that was the second part, was organizing. And what I mean by organizing is the work that my team was doing, the field team, going out, getting people to commit to caucus, and having the most efficient, well-oiled machine of organizing and turning people out to caucus that the state of Iowa had ever seen. So we were ruthless, we were relentless about making sure that we had gotten people to sign up to commit.
Mm-hmm.
We had them sign um, uh, caucus cards, commitment cards, saying
Mm-hmm.
basically like, I, Kenny, or I, Chelsea, commit to caucus for Barack Obama. So
Yeah.
obviously there's nothing that
No
forced them to
binding thing
show up
about that.
after they
Yeah.
did that. Yeah, no, it wasn't binding, no like legal
But it's
agreement, but
psychological.
the human psychology element of it, exactly, was to really help people feel committed and invested in the campaign. Um, the other name of the game in Iowa around organizing is recruiting precinct captains. So,
Mm.
when we talk about these big, chaotic community meetings that are a caucus,
Yeah.
you have to have somebody who's in charge of your candidates group of people.
Mm.
And there's 1,000 precincts across the state. So you can't just hire 1,000 people, 1,000 employees to show up and manage that. But we had to recruit and train really deeply in caucus math,
Yeah.
one person, and then a whole team of people to support them in all 1,000 precincts across Iowa. So that was a major part of what my team was doing, was really deep organizing in every single precinct, finding people who are passionate, bringing them in, getting them involved, and then asking them to take on this major volunteer leadership role. And we were successful in doing that, in finding a precinct captain in every single one of those 1,000 precincts all across the state. And then the final piece of the strategy was really our team culture
Mm.
and our team motto across the state, which was respect, empower, and include. And it
Mm.
came from our state campaign leadership, just basically saying, most of you kids, we were mostly kids, are
Mm.
not from Iowa. You are a
Mm.
guest in this state, and we are going to run a campaign that is respectful of the state that we're in,
Mm.
that empowers volunteers to take on
Mm.
jobs and to have a meaningful role in the campaign, and to include everybody who wants to be part of it. So it was that ruthless organizing along with a really solid strategy in a really, really strong culture. That
And
was
is
our essentially state strategy.
Yeah, and is that something different from the other campaigns? Like, do the other campaigns, when they come in from all their out-of-state people, do they tend to be more of, and we're running it our way? Is there less of that trust to the local community?
That tension is very present
Yeah.
in most political campaigns, actually, because the people who are able to kind of put their lives on hold and take a full-time job working on a campaign tend to, not have a lot of roots tying them down somewhere. So they're
Sure.
often young,
Yeah.
they're less experienced, they, just might not have a much life perspective as the volunteers who've been there volunteering for the Democratic Party year in and year out. So that tension always exists. And it was really intentional on our part that we were going to be incredible guests in the state of Iowa, and that we were
Mm-hmm.
going to leave the Democratic Party better than we found it.
Mm.
Um, and to just be a really good partner to all the Iowans that we were working with.
Did the strategy of the campaign evolve over time? Were there other planks that rose as you got closer to the caucus, or were there things that fell away that maybe a strategy you didn't mention that at the start you're like, you know what, we're going to be on Instagram. Never mind, we're not going to be on Instagram. Was there anything that changed over the course of the campaign?
Honestly, no, no. It,
Yeah.
it like I think that then Senator Obama hired like the best in the business as his campaign manager, and that person hired the best in the business as the
Mm.
Iowa State Director,
Mhm.
and they had a really clear understanding of what it would take to win and what the pathways were to
Yeah.
win. So those pathways stayed the same for the entire campaign. I think what changed is maybe some of the tactics along the way because we were an organization that was just, again, relentlessly focused on being the best that we could be. So we would always be sharing with each other, oh, what's the best way to collect all of these
Hmm.
commitment cards? So a great example of that is like, you go to a parade, right? And people, there's always like political candidates in the parades. And
Yes.
Iowa
Yeah.
loves a parade. Like culturally, Iowa is like a very pro parade kind of state. So we would get roped into like going and marching in these parades all the time. And then, you know, organizers on our team realized, wait a minute, there's just a captive audience of Iowans sitting along the side of this parade
Hmm.
route watching us. So we're going to have twice as many volunteers walking the parade route and
Mm.
collecting commitment to caucus cards during the parade.
Hmm.
And I don't think the other campaigns were doing that.
Yeah.
The Edwards people and the Hillary people, they were just walking around with their signs and throwing candy. And we saw
Mm.
this as an opportunity to organize.
Yeah.
And so it was tactics like that people would see opportunities and make changes, but I actually think like a, an axiom of campaigns is plan your work and work your plan. And that's
Mm.
what we did. And I think that's actually why we won is we knew what the pathway was and we just executed it really well and stayed on our plan the whole time.
And you talked earlier about how optimistic you were about how much energy this campaign was. I'm curious, did that mean that you always were confident you were going to win, or was there a moment where you started to be like, wait, I think we are going to win? Like before, I just want now. I think like it's going to happen. I believe like it's coming.
Hmm. I think we spent the majority of the time that I was there feeling like we were in second place, thinking that that we were a long shot,
Yeah.
and we were, right?
Yeah.
Like the numbers would tell us that, the polling would tell us that, but that motivated us, and we knew that. I mean, we were
Mm-hmm.
running against a Clinton,
Hmm.
and we were always going to be in second place. And I would say I got there in May all the way through the fall, honestly. Like I think we kept our heads down, and our state director would get on our calls and just say, I have one thing to say about polls to you. Polls don't mean shit. So just keep working. And like he just meant that as like, polls are not a predictor of the future, right? Polls
Right.
are telling us what we know right now.
Right.
They're not telling us if we can win on January 3rd. They're telling us that we're
Mm.
not winning today, but today it's, September, whatever. So we still have 4 months to get this done. Um, but there were moments late when it started to feel like we could be cautiously optimistic. So there's a poll that's done in Iowa that's been done for a couple decades called the Iowa poll, by a really renowned pollster there named Ann Selzer. And her poll came out late in the race, that showed Obama winning. And that was actually the first poll that had showed us winning in
Mm.
Iowa, but it was also considered like the gold standard of Iowa polling.
Right.
But that was late. I mean, Kenny, that was like November. And we had
Yeah.
been slogging through the spring, the summer, the fall, like working
Yeah.
7 days a week, never being shown in first place,
Hmm.
until then. The other moment I think that we thought we might have a chance was there were all these opportunities for kind of a show of the strength of your organization,
Sure.
like big events, big moments.
Yeah.
And there was an event again late in the fall called the Jefferson Jackson Dinner,
Yeah.
which is like an annual thing that like most Democratic parties do, except they stopped calling it Jefferson Jackson. We stopped
Bad
naming our
branding. Poor
events.
branding. Yeah.
Yeah, after slaveholders a little while ago in the Democratic Party. Um, the Republicans have their Lincoln Day dinner. They chose better than us.
Yeah. Lincoln was a good one. Good egg.
Yeah, yeah. But it's kind of like the last big event of the caucus, and it's considered kind of a test of your organization for caucus night of like, can you get a couple thousand volunteers to show up to this dinner and this big event in an arena to support your candidate? And we just had an incredible demonstration of visibility and
Mm.
strength, and Obama gave what I still think is probably one of like his maybe top 5, top 10 best speeches of his political
Mm.
career at this dinner.
Mm.
Um, and it just became really clear that we had the strongest organization
Mm.
in the field. of candidates. We were better organized. We had more passionate volunteers. And then you looked at this poll, and this was all kind of around November, and it started to feel like, okay, maybe we are going to do it. We can't take our foot off the gas, but maybe we're going to do it.
And you're starting to feel like maybe we're going to do it. How did that feel yourself emotionally? Are you like, is that elation? Is it almost scary when you see that, you know?
We all felt really energized near the end. Um, you know, and again, we were such a tight team. At the end of the day, this was still a workplace, right? It's a
Yeah.
campaign, but it's a workplace.
Yeah.
And people were just so invested in each other as
Mm,
coworkers and
mm-hmm.
team members. And we were all working so hard, toward, the home stretch that I think we felt great at the end. We actually ended up celebrating Christmas together. No one was allowed to leave the state of Iowa for Christmas
Yeah.
because the caucus was January 3rd. And another thing about Iowa is
Oh,
like, they love their snow and their ice
yes.
storms. And so we
Yes.
couldn't risk having our organizing team
Right. Being trapped outside.
stranded out of state,
Yeah.
right? Days before the caucus. So our 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 state director gave us a really great break at Thanksgiving, and that was your time to go home, be
Mm,
with your family at Thanksgiving,
mm-hmm.
with the understanding that Christmas would be spent with our like campaign family.
Yeah.
Um, and so we planned all these Christmas celebrations across the state. A lot of my colleagues were, invited to their volunteers' homes for
Oh,
Christmas.
yeah.
And that was just like a time of like really appreciating what an incredible opportunity this was. And frankly, just feeling really energized for like the last 7 or 8 days of the campaign.
All right. So you're there. You do your Christmas celebrations, which sounds lovely. What warm memories, by the way. And you said though it's right that January 3rd is the caucus day. So what was caucus night like? Where were you that night? What were you doing?
Hmm. Caucus day and night was both one of the most boring and most exciting days of my professional life. It's a funny secret of working in campaigns. A lot of people will tell you this. Election day is usually really boring
Yeah.
because you've already done all the work. You've laid
Yeah.
all the plans, and even the stuff that's still happening on election day has been planned, has been rehearsed, has been double rehearsed and double and triple checked. So it's just a lot of really anxious waiting. So, we didn't invest a lot of time in Iowa in like going out and waving signs, but we
Mm.
had nothing to do. And our field director was like, gosh, everyone is just like so anxious and
Yeah.
has
Yeah.
nothing to do. So they sent us out to all go wave signs on the morning commute the day of. And that's the only time we ever did any sign waving was that morning.
Mm.
But I honestly, Kenny, I had nothing to do. And so I remember just being like, I'm gonna go home. I'm gonna like get a change of clothes, get myself a nice lunch. It was like truly the only boring day of the campaign for me because
Yeah.
we were so well prepared. But I did go to a caucus site. I didn't caucus because we weren't allowed to register to vote in Iowa. Like our
Sure.
legally we could have, but our campaign made that
Yeah.
decision that like we
Interesting.
were we were not gonna have any non-Iowans register and caucus. So
Mm.
I went to help one of our less confident precinct captains.
Mm.
She ended up just completely nailing it and didn't need my help,
Mm.
but
Yeah.
I got to be there in person and see it all happen and just kind of sit back and be so proud of our organization and so proud of my staff member who had recruited and trained this precinct captain and seeing how she just managed everything exactly how we wanted her to and how proud she was of herself to have been part of it.
And I'm curious, I remember you described the drama that can happen in that room. Do you remember what the drama was like in that room? Was it Obama's clear favorite? Was there a lot of action happening in the caucus room you happened to be in?
Can I tell you something so funny, Kenny? I
Yeah.
don't even remember if we won the precinct caucus that I was at. I actually haven't even thought about this. I'm just going to go ahead and say, yes, we won. But I truly don't remember. I truly don't remember. Yeah, I do remember, driving back from the caucus site and kind
Yeah.
of, you know, getting text messages on my BlackBerry because it was,
Yeah.
2008 and I was on my BlackBerry and finding out that we had won and coming back to the office and
Hmm.
seeing my whole staff and team and friends and like just like the incredible like elation and joy of that moment. But I do not remember if my precinct captain, who I was so proud of, actually won that caucus or
And
not.
tell me more about what that reaction is like. So are you literally like trying to look at your phone at stoplights while you're driving home? Like, did we win? Did we lose? What are the results? Like, and
Yeah,
what is that? Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So again, this is like a tabulation of a community meeting that's happening in real time where
Right.
all the precinct captains get their numbers, they finalize the results, they call them into some central room at the
Yeah.
Iowa Democratic Party. The Iowa Democratic Party starts turning out results to news organizations, turning out results to the campaigns, and the campaigns have all kind of invested in analytics to be able to know what does it mean if this
Mm.
bellwether caucus is one that we're winning, and what
Mm.
does it mean if
Yeah.
we're losing in that one, and what does it mean if turnout is three times we thought it would be here. So they could kind of
Right.
take the like little kernels of information that come in and then project what's going to happen. And so even before all the results were in, um, the race was called. And I I don't remember. They definitely wouldn't have called it while the caucuses were still going on, right? Because that's
Okay.
kind of like calling it when people are still voting.
You could
But
influence
it
things.
was,
Sure. Yeah.
yeah, definitely some point before I got back into the office, like it had been called. So I was like alone with my own thoughts, like
Hmm.
with a minute to process it, finding that out, but then getting to just like walk through the doors of our headquarters and people were just so excited and so joyful and people were crying and they were hugging each other and just it was a really incredible moment.
And what happens next? I mean, I imagine winning the caucus must be like the highest of highs, and then it's like all the air is out of the balloon. On to New Hampshire, on to the next one. What's it feel like in Iowa when the campaign moves on? Is it like cleaning up after a big party?
Oh my gosh, it is like the day after your wedding. The day It is like the day after high school graduation, where it's like it's built up in your mind, and
Hmm.
then you have the high of, whatever that is, and then
Yeah.
it truly is. It is the biggest letdown. And the craziest part about it as a campaign staffer, for the most part, almost all of us had moved to Iowa to be part of
Mm-hmm.
this
Yeah.
effort. I mean,
Yeah.
probably 95% of our staff was not from the state of Iowa.
Yeah.
So everybody was going to be packing up,
Mm-hmm.
shipping out to subsequent states because,
Mm-hmm.
the Obama campaign, we weren't um, big enough to have really invested anywhere but those first four states. So
Mm.
Iowa, New Hampshire,
Yeah.
South Carolina, Nevada, we didn't really have any staff anywhere but those four states and then our headquarters in Chicago. So
Mm.
um, yeah, everybody just scatters to different states to help try to go win the next one. And I went to Nevada and was part of the
Mm.
Nevada caucus, and I worked at a casino caucus location, which was absolutely bizarre. Um, yeah, and then it just went on and on and on and on forever. It was actually only like 4 more months, but it felt like an eternity that
I'm
the
sure.
primaries and caucuses continued.
Why do you think Obama went on to win not just the Democratic nomination that year, but the presidency in 2008?
Mm. Well, I think Barack Obama knew who he was and why he wanted to be president.
Hmm.
He had a vision and he had a point of view, and he had the self-confidence to be honest about what he thought and what he saw, and people responded to that in the primary and in the general election. I think he had an authenticity that was kind of unique in a
Yeah.
generation in politics.
So beyond issues, beyond what was happening around, you think it was really the authenticity and the person himself that resonated and carried him
I
through.
think so. Yeah, he was the right leader for the right moment.
And then you served on the 2012 campaign. Just a quick cut on that. Why do you think he won re-election in 2012, going up against Mitt Romney, a race that did look to be a tough one?
Mm-hmm. You know, when I listened to your first podcast. I really liked it. It was actually a really
Thank
nice
you.
refresher on, frankly, like I really shared your perspective on like what a successful presidency he had,
Mm,
especially in the context of what the American presidency is, today in the modern
mm,
era.
mm.
And I think like he had accomplished so much. I mean, what was the line from the campaign? It was like Osama bin Laden is dead and General Motors is alive, or something, like maybe the other way around. General Motors is alive and Osama bin Laden was dead.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, so I think people saw tangible change
yeah,
and tangible progress. And Mitt Romney, who I've always liked and I've come to like and respect even more
yeah,
in the last few years,
yeah.
just frankly didn't have that same authenticity and that same vision.
Mm, that's
I
true.
think it's actually a bigger shock that Barack Obama beat John McCain, who did have authenticity and did have a vision,
Mm,
instead of losing to Mitt Romney, because I think Mitt Romney just, did not have that same sense of purpose,
mm.
and also just came across as, well, he actually was out of touch. Again, I love Mitt Romney, but he was and remains out of touch.
Yeah. The last couple of questions I got for you is what do you think the impact and legacy of that 2008 Dark Horse campaign is?
That's a great question. That's a great question. I think that the the impact and the legacy is probably mostly for candidates and
Hmm.
lessons for candidates about
Mm.
really knowing who you are and what you think. I think that our media landscape and our politics have changed so much that I don't know that as many of the lessons about the campaign tactics still apply.
Mm, mhm.
Um, but Barack Obama said and did some unpopular things that he felt, you know, committed to. He was opposed to the war in Iraq. He
Mhm.
was not willing to say that we should have single payer healthcare just because everybody said we should, because he said it's
Mm,
it's it's a great idea, but it's a pipe dream in
mhm,
2007.
mhm.
And he got in so much trouble for that. Um, he said that we should give driver's licenses to people who were undocumented because we don't want people driving cars who don't know how to drive cars. Like
Yeah,
he was really sure of who he was and what he thought. And I think that, we've seen kind of the dark side of that with our current president, who
mhm,
is also authentic in his own way.
mhm.
But you kind of look at, who has won, who has been a successful candidate for president over the last, 20 years. It's really people
Mm.
who kind of have a good sense of what they believe and what
Yeah,
their vision is for the country, whether or not, you agree with what that vision is. But I think Obama's approach proves that that is the case.
yeah, I'll definitely agree with you. People need to be able to very clearly know what your vision is. And if they don't know what your candidate's vision is, why are they voting for you? And that's going to hurt you. Last question. What lesson in leadership do you think can be learned from how Obama ran the 2008 campaign?
hmm hmm I think that when campaigns give people real and meaningful roles, when they
Mhm,
invest in organizing, when they recognize that, volunteers are not people to just come in and complete tasks and do things for the campaign, but that they really want to be part of something. And when you give them a meaningful role with responsibility and you bring them into the campaign and make them just as important as the candidate, that you can achieve really amazing things through organizing. I mean, you look kind of across all of the different state Democratic parties where the Obama campaign invested in 2008 and 2012, and there's still positive impacts today of people who
mhm,
got involved because the campaign trusted them and empowered them with a really important job as a volunteer. So I think that that is his most important legacy as a candidate in terms of what our campaigns for electoral positions look like, and also frankly a lot of our social justice organizing today.
mhm,
The same principles of community organizing that he really espoused and invested in and used to win in 2008 and 2012.
Chelsea Waliser, thank you so much for your time. I greatly enjoyed learning from you about what the experience was inside the 2008 Obama campaign in Iowa.
Thank you, Kenny. Such a pleasure to get to relive those memories too with you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Abridged Presidential Histories. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, tell your friends and family about the show, and write a 5-star review on your podcast listening platform of choice. If you'd like to support the show, you can look up on Patreon or go directly to www.patreon.com/abridgedpresidentialhistories. This helps me buy books, pay to host the show, and thank you so much to everyone who's contributed so far. The music in today's podcast is a public domain recording of the United States Army Old Guard Fife and Drum Corps. Let's talk about what's next. A lot of folks have asked me, how am I going to approach the 2 disconnected terms of Donald Trump? The answer is this: I'll handle it like I did Grover Cleveland. There will be an episode on his first term, then I'll have an episode on Joe Biden, and then sometime down the line, an episode on Trump's second term. Which means it is time to talk about how a New York real estate developer with a flair for showmanship tapped into a deep undercurrents of grievance to bully and boast his way to the presidency of the United States. How his administration was buffeted by the unexpected coronavirus pandemic, and how his inability to admit he could ever lose at anything led to the deadly insurrection of January 6th. That's next time on Abridged Presidential Histories.